Hey everybody, this is the update for the week. There's a lot going on and some things that require a little extra explanation because it's complicated, so this might be a little longer than normal. We'll start out with the House Judiciary Committee hearing holding Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress. And a couple points I want to make here. First of all, it's been 43 days, or it was 43 days, since the committee under Jerry Nadler issued a subpoena to Attorney General Barr, and the subpoena said that he had to issue the unredacted Mueller report. And of course, the Mueller report is the report into Russian collusion and obstruction of justice. So he gave the Attorney General 43 days. And the reason that's important is because this circumstance is being compared to when Attorney General Holder was held in contempt of Congress. The difference is Holder was given 400 days to comply. I think they just got the information 7 years later. But in any case, so 43 days, what the requirement was, what the subpoena was for, is the unredacted version of the Mueller report. Understand, it is against the law for the Attorney General to give the unredacted report to the general public or to generally Congress. Because there is grand jury testimony in there, and this is enshrined in law, grand jury testimony that would implicate other innocent individuals and have them have their names besmirched and have no way to defend themselves in the public arena, as well as classified information that can't be divulged. Now, what the Attorney General did offer, and there were ongoing negotiations during this 43 days, he offered members of the committee to come in and see the redacted portions in the secure area, in the classified setting. They all refused on the Democrat side of the aisle. Only Doug Collins and the Republicans went to see that redacted information. So to hold him in contempt seems, to me, quite honestly, very disingenuous and highly political. That having been said, it passed out of the committee 24-16. That means it's out of committee. It will come to the floor. Just to give you a predetermination, unless things change, we will have a vote on the floor to hold the Attorney General in contempt. And unless some other information comes to light, I will be voting no. I don't think it's appropriate to force the Attorney General to break the law or hold him in contempt, which is essentially what that action did. So there's that. Now we're going to move on to what's called the Pre-Existing Conditions Bill. I'm going to spend a little time with this. This is H.R. 986, entitled the Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions Act of 2019. And let me just make this very clear for you. H.R. 986 has absolutely nothing to do with protecting people with pre-existing conditions. This is what we call a messaging bill. It has that title so that at some point during the campaign, they can put up on TV that so-and-so voted against protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and they're going to list a House bill or House Resolution 986 at the bottom of the screen. Now, what this did was, well, let me back up a little bit. Under the Patient Care and Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise known by some as Obamacare, what part of that provision was a thing called innovation waivers, so that states might be able to innovate and do things a little differently within certain parameters to allow more people access to health care. But within the parameters of that, states were always prohibited from waiving the protections for pre-existing conditions. Under the law, they are prohibited from waiving those provisions. So understand, it's the innovation. These are innovation waivers, so it allows states to do some different things. What they want to do is, right now, the states have to comply with a certain number of people, even under the innovation waivers. What the administration is seeking to do and has done is saying that states can still innovate as long as they require the same access. You might not get the same number under this program, but you might have 3 programs that actually have more people involved, or any number of programs. But you have different programs and you provide the exact same access. Again, the law requires that everybody with pre-existing conditions be allowed and provided access to care. That's under the law, and the innovation waivers don't change that. This is just a highly political messaging bill, and that's why I voted against it, because actually, without the innovation waivers that Governor Wolf and any governor can authorize, people are paying more and more for their care. especially the ones that can least afford it and the ones with pre-existing conditions. The reason innovation waivers are in there is because we want the governors, we want the individual states to find ways to cut costs for people with pre-existing conditions. So I just want you to have that explanation so you know why I voted no on that. I actually want the cost of care to come down. I want people with pre-existing conditions to have access. I want people on the lower end of the economic scale to have the easiest access to health care. That's a messaging bill only, but you will hear about it again, so be on the lookout for it. Actually, we had what's called a motion to recommit, and we do these often. I oftentimes don't talk about them, but this is an important one. So we had a motion to recommit, which would make it clear that under the law, protections for pre-existing conditions cannot be waived. So we had this bill. We were seeking to amend it to once again reiterate very strongly and very clearly that protections for pre-existing conditions cannot be waived. The majority party, the Democrats, refused to vote for that bill. It failed on a number of 182 to 231. So that's Republicans trying to say you cannot take the coverage for pre-existing conditions away, and Democrats voting against it. It's purely messaging. Just understand this is purely messaging, and it's just inappropriate because we should be working together to try and make things better instead of doing messaging bills, but that's literally what we're doing. All right, so then we had the supplemental appropriations bill. So the House voted on H.R. 2157, which is the Supplemental Appropriations Act. It's a disaster relief bill. Now, included in the disaster relief bill is also the extension of the National Flood Insurance Program, which is important to all of us, and it's due to expire before the end of the month. And that was put in as a sweetener because they wanted to get people to vote for this. Understand there are other things in this bill, and in particular, I need to address Puerto Rico alone. We allocated $11 billion of the appropriated $41 billion, in addition to $50 billion in disaster relief for Puerto Rico. So, as the president said, $91 billion. Yet we're going to still send another $11 billion. And let me tell you something that really distresses me and aggravates me with this. Part of it is there's a company called PREPA. The Puerto Rican Power Company is what that is, and a lot of this money is going to fix that. Not going to bring it up to the standard it was before the hurricane come, but to rebuild the whole thing across the island after decades and decades of abuse and mismanagement, literally giving power away for decades and decades. And that's why they didn't have any money, which is why they didn't maintain their system, which is why it failed so miserably during the hurricane. And if you compare Puerto Rico to, say, Texas or Florida or other places that were hit, that's why Puerto Rico was so devastated, because they never reinvested into their power system because they didn't charge their customers to have power. Now what's happening under this disaster bill is all of America's taxpayers are paying to rebuild PREPA, not to the standard it was prior to the storm, but to today's standards in all of the rest of America. It's unacceptable to me, not to mention the fact that we have caps on spending. This appropriation spent $18 billion more than the cap. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the point of having a spending cap if you're just going to go blow through it every time? We're $22 trillion in debt. At some point, you got to say, we don't have the money to keep doing this. This is how we get to $22 trillion in debt. So, unfortunately, I had to vote against it when they throw all those things in at one time. We had some hearings this week. I'm on Foreign Affairs, as you know, on China. China continues to be a malign actor. Of course, you're probably aware of the trade negotiations that occurred this week with the president, and the fact that China actually, they'd agreed upon many things. And then when the negotiations got to a point where they didn't like it, they said, no, we don't agree to those things anymore. And so the president imposed the tariffs. I don't like the tariffs. You don't like the tariffs, but I'm going to tell you this. If we don't deal with China now, it just gets worse every single year as they invest in our pension plans, buy more of our businesses, and infiltrate more of our systems in our country. So while I don't like it, China's feet need to be held to the fire, whether it's the theft of intellectual property, dumping products into our country, and just continually cheating on just about everything they do. So that's where we are. We had several hearings on that this week that were very informative, and you can probably see those on YouTube as well, or on C-SPAN, I mean. North Korea had 2 separate missile launches. Of course, the United States generally responded in kind, letting North Korea know where we stand with that and what our abilities are and our capabilities are vis-a-vis them. I will continue to say the linchpin for North Korea, because there's very little we can do diplomatically with North Korea in principle. What we can do is influence the people that influence North Korea, China and Russia. This week's actions on China will help. There need to be more, in my opinion. We need to get tougher with Russia regarding North Korea. That's my position and how we solve or continue to try and solve this North Korea issue. Iran, as you've heard, is pulling out of the nuclear deal, the JOCPA, JOCPA. I asked if we're going to get all the money back that we sent on pallets to Iran. I suspect we're not. As you know, we've sent the carrier group. We've also sent some bombers because we have credible information that there are threatening American interests in the Middle East. And that's big things and other things as well. And it's directly, it can be directed right to the combatants that we have. People in uniform that are serving in Middle Eastern areas, whether it's on the border of Syria or whether it's in Iraq or whether it's in other surrounding areas. And so that's why the carrier group is there. That's why the bombers are there. We want to send Iran a very specific message. Do not harm the interest of America or Americans, or you're going to get it. And that's why. And I agree with that posture right now. Also, Venezuela, that just continues, and I still think that there is room for diplomacy there. I'm not going to be supportive of sending troops at this time. I don't know if it's going to come up as a conversation. I think we should have a conversation of it, but understand that you always have to have the specter of military force for diplomacy to work well. Once again, I don't think we need to send troops directly into Venezuela. Russia, China, Iran, all the malign actors that fight with America and democratic societies are present in Venezuela right now. Particularly Russia and their goons are protecting Maduro and his regime. It's my opinion that if Russia wants to camp out in our backyard, we ought to be sending anti-aircraft defense artillery to the Ukraine. We ought to be sending short-range and long-range missile batteries into the Balkans and the Baltics, into Poland. We ought to pre-position armor brigades over there and let Russia know that America is ready to defend our interests. And if they want to fool around in our hemisphere, we're going to be right on their back door. Understand, Russia has an economy the size of Italy. And not to say, but it's obviously much larger than Italy. It's not to impugn Italy. It's just to say that that's the size of it versus America. I think that Vladimir Putin will get the message if we start doing those things. And so I think that's the appropriate action, much longer, or much preferred before sending troops to Venezuela. So that's the update for this week. And if you have any questions, especially on the pre-existing condition bill, I hope you would reach out and contact the office, because we would love to make that very plain for you, because I'm just going to tell you, you're going to see that again, and just know it's a messaging bill that didn't fix a darn thing, and that's why I voted against it. God bless you, and thank you for your time.